All right, y'all, getting a little bit closer here to wrapping up on Unit 8, okay? So we went through all these different little aspects of the Cold War, some of the actual fighting that takes place, some of those proxy wars, and then finished off with, yeah, the whole big bit there on, kind of what's, in a way, kind of the backbone of the Cold War, which is nuclear weapons, the nukes, okay? So where we need to go here is boom, there we go. We need to end this thing, all right? Because we got a whole different topic. We still have decolonization we need to cover. And so that's where I'm going to take you, all right? And I'm going to start you off with a word there that you're going to look at that and you're going to be thinking détente. No, it is French. It is détente, all right? And the word détente means basically to relax. And what we're going to see after the Cuban Missile Crisis is a realization by both, the United States and the Soviet Union that we got close. I mean, one wrong move and that would have been game over for everyone. And so there is more of an effort made between 1963 and 1979 to ease or relax tensions between our two countries. Okay, and we'll go through some examples of what happens with détente. Well, maybe we'll do it in an order. There we go. First of all, there's benefit for both countries. One of the things we haven't really talked about, I don't think that much at all, is the fact that this nuclear arms race and space race and all the other, and proxy wars, they're expensive. All right, I mean it is just crazy expensive trying to keep up with each other. Getting dragged into these conflicts and having to pay for, if it's not your own military, you're paying for another country's military. Incredibly expensive. And both countries are beginning to feel the effects of it by the 1960s. The Soviet Union probably a little bit more so than the United States, just because their economy has, even in the best of days, has been somewhat limited because of their commitment to communism, which just still, in the 1960s, they're still waiting for it to, happen, and it hasn't happened yet. They're still led by, these kind of a little bit more, strongman leaders, that kind of thing, okay? And for the United States, again, this gives us an opportunity to kind of maybe be able to refocus some of the money that we've been dumping into all that and spend it domestically on, issues we have here going on at home, things like that, okay? And so in 1972, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, right? That is what SALT is. I guess I'm being redundant there by putting the word treaty at the end of it, but oh well. This is an agreement by the United States and the Soviet Union. Not that they're going to okay, that's it, we're done. No more nuclear weapons. We'll destroy our arsenals. And, no. It just means that they're going to, we're going to slow down basically the numbers of weapons that we keep in our possession. We're going to start to put some caps on how many weapons, and we allow inspectors to come in, and we use kind of neutral countries to go in and inspect, or UN inspectors to go in and make sure that both sides are adhering to the rules. But it is the first treaty really since the beginning of the Cold War where the leaders, and you got the picture there of our president early in 1972. That's Richard Nixon over there on the right side, and then Leonid Brezhnev over on the left. The guy that, if you got to check out the eyebrows on that guy, they're impressive. I mean, as a matter of fact, do a Google search for Brezhnev's eyebrows and just sit back and be ready to be amazed. Anyhow, they're the two leaders who get together and hammer out this treaty. Okay, so a part of détente. All right. And things will kind of trundle along that way through the 1970s, and then we'll all fall apart. That'll be the end of détente and kind of putting the gloves back on. And what triggers it is that in 1979, if you remember learning way back when about the Great Game, that was Russia and Great Britain kind of tussling over Afghanistan and some of those southern Asia areas. And back then it was Russia trying to figure out, they want a warm water port. They want a port that gives them access to the Indian Ocean and all that. Well, that's never gone away. And so in 1979, the country of Afghanistan has a revolution, and the government that takes over in this revolution is kind of quasi-Marxist. So in other words, they're kind of like communist light, okay? And there's different versions of how this plays out, but in the end, apparently they invite the Soviet Union to bring their troops into Afghanistan to help quell to fight this revolution and to end up with Afghanistan, a communist country that's going to be very, very Soviet friendly. That's going to be the beginning of a 10-year war for the Soviet Union. It would be very much likened, a lot of historians will refer to it as their own Vietnam, because 10 years later, the Soviets are going to have to bail out of Afghanistan. They're not going to have their warm water port. They're going to bail out pretty much kind of embarrassed and a little bit shocked, just the way the United States did when we pulled out of Vietnam, in 1975. It stunned us because we were just used to any military excursion we went into, we won, and that was a big black eye. This would be as well to the Soviet Union, and was yet another lesson that unfortunately us, the United States, did not learn, and that is that apparently no one conquers Afghanistan. The British tried it. The Soviet Union tries it. And when we send troops to Afghanistan after 9/11, we're not trying to conquer Afghanistan, but we do send our troops in there to help with the country and stabilize it, and we end up leaving in pretty much a state of chaos and disarray in the 2020s. No one has ever been able to conquer and keep Afghanistan under their control. Okay, and if you ever end up leading a country, remember that, all right? No crazy, let's do a little adventure, just a little adventure. Well, I don't know. Afghanistan sounds like an easy country. No, not at all. Not at all. All right. From détente, we're going to shift into the 1980s. Critical time in the Cold War, okay? Mainly because, yes, what these new leaders are going to sweep in with them. First of all, in 1980, new president here in the United States, Ronald Reagan, is elected what will be the first of his 2 terms, and this is a guy that people have very, very polarizing opinions about him, but some historians say that when it came to at least the Cold War and the international stage, he was kind of like right guy at the right time. Reagan hated communism, and he almost immediately identified the Soviet Union as I think in his words the evil empire. This was back in the days when Star Wars was still kind of fresh in the movies and everything. And so, he's right on cue, which would make sense because, well, Reagan, before he became a politician, was an actor in Hollywood. And but he definitely he is committed to wanting to end communism wherever it exists around the world, including the Soviet Union. And it is his belief that the Soviet Union is a country that is beginning to show, kind of like cracks around the foundation. And all it's going to take is going to be the right amount of pressure applied, and he's going to be able to bring it down. And it's something that he feels is going to happen while he is president. And he'll be pretty darn close. Okay? Over on the other side, in the Soviet Union, they also have a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. And you see the pictures over there, right side, pictured him with Reagan, and then a picture of him over on the left. I'm telling you straight up, I know you're looking at those pictures thinking, that's an old guy. Look at that, all that gray hair. Well, what hair he has. And no. For the Soviet Union by 1980, this guy is like a spring chicken. They go through a stretch. When Brezhnev dies in the 70s, they go through 2 or 3 leaders that, they're already in their 80s when they're elevated to power. And they've got like this obsession in the Soviet Union. They want their leaders to have some kind of connection back to the revolution, back to 1917. And one of their leaders ends up, I think he's only in office for about a month or 2, and he dies. It's all natural causes. They're old men. And, you can only imagine the instability that creates in a government when you're bringing in these guys who are, one foot in the coffin, and, of course it's not going to go well. And so it seemed like after I think it was the third of these old guys kicks the bucket, that they decide that, all right, we need to go with someone much, much younger. And for Gorbachev to be in his 50s when he becomes the leader of the Soviet Union, it's much, much, much younger. The guy's like, probably 30 years younger than his predecessor. And as a younger guy, no, he has no connection to the revolution. His experience growing up is very, very different. kind of a Soviet Union than all these other leaders who could had remembered Stalin. Some remembered Lenin, that kind of thing. And so he's going to come with a very, very different kind of an attitude, and we'll see some examples of that. Okay, all right. So they both get into office and kind of settle in, and here's where things start to kind of really heat up. So for Gorbachev, he comes in and he sees himself that going into the 80s, he looks at it at the Soviet Union and says, we're in trouble. Economic issues. Even détente really doesn't significantly change the fact that the Soviet Union is very slowly basically going bankrupt. There's not enough money that comes in given the way their economy is set up. And yeah, it's a serious problem. And you're also starting to get some of the Soviet people who are finally starting to get a little bit worn out or tired of really just the control that the government has over them. What they can read, what they can listen to in terms of music, what they can watch on TV. It's all government controlled. And as media is improving going into the later part of the 20th century, there are more and more Soviet citizens that are getting glimpses of the world beyond and are beginning to become more aware that they're missing a lot. And so Gorbachev comes in with this twin strategy of what's called perestroika and glasnost. Okay, and for perestroika, I want to see if I have before I go on here. No, okay. So perestroika is basically a restructuring of the Soviet economy. Okay, where Gorbachev's government is going to start tinkering with some elements of the economy to try to strengthen it. All right, that is perestroika. Reforms to the economic system of the Soviet Union. Glasnost is a policy of opening up to the West. Okay, in other words, finally saying, whether it's the United States or Great Britain or France or wherever it may be, they don't pose a threat to us. Communism is solid, it's safe, it's sound, and if our people listen to a Beatles album, they're not going to suddenly, abandon communism and want to become some kind of a raving, insane capitalist. And so he begins to kind of basically raise the curtain to allow for there to be more cultural interaction between the West and the Soviet Union. And so, yeah, it will be after Glasnost that for the first time you can legally buy Beatles albums in the Soviet Union. Don't worry, there had been plenty of Beatles going around the Soviet Union before, but there were always illegal black market albums. Now you can buy them legally, and movies and books and everything else, right? And and for there, Gorbachev is trying to kind of little pressure release here, on the population. It's like, yeah, we have nothing to fear, right? Nothing to fear. Okay. The other thing that Gorbachev does, and this is probably even this is a bigger and bolder move, and sends a very clear message in a way to the world of just how serious the problems are in the Soviet Union, and that is that those satellite states, those satellite countries, those that security buffer that Stalin had demanded when the Cold War was first getting started, all through these 30, almost 40 years. These countries have been almost completely and totally held up by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union pumping in money, pumping in the military support, all of that. These countries are dependent on the Soviet Union, which they wanted. I mean, that was the whole idea of the puppet states, But Gorbachev makes the decision that he's like, this is part of the reason why our country is going down the drain, is we're trying to keep these other countries running as well. And their economies are fundamentally flawed. And so he announces that the Soviet Union is going to phase out its support for these satellite states, these puppet states, and that they are going to be they're going to be on their own. All right. And once these satellite states understand that the Soviet Union is leaving them, think about the people of Poland, the people of Czechoslovakia and Hungary. I mean, this is what they thought they were getting in 1945. Now that it's 1988, 1989, it's finally happening. And so what happens is as the Soviets pull out of these countries, they break into kind of like peaceful revolution, I guess I'll call it. As one by one, I suppose Gorbachev in you know, in his dreams was hoping that, that they love communism so much that even after the Soviet Union leaves, they'll maintain it. No, they abandon a communism, immediately and begin free elections and bringing in political parties and forming dramatically different democratic based governments. And so we see this sweep through all of these Eastern European countries, all these countries that had been part of the Soviet Union, more or less, or at least been controlled by them, who now have the freedom to call their own shots and do their own thing. And it happens at very, very, very quick, very dramatic speed. All right. Probably the peak of that hits in November of 1989. I always remember November because this happens literally on the day that my oldest son was born. On the day he was born, the Berlin Wall came down, and that signified the end of the divide in Germany between East and West. And so that is a huge move as the Soviet Union also gives up its support of Eastern Germany. And after 40 years, Germany is once again reunited into a single Germany. Okay, and really, this is all heading towards what is going to be the end of the Soviet Union itself. And again, understand, as I'm talking about the quick, I guess, having lived through all of this, the speed with which it all happened was just, jaw dropping. It was like every day, you're going to open up, the news, and it was just going to be what major event is going on now that is completely, shaking up the, geopolitical map of, of Europe, of the Soviet Union, that whole part of the world. And 1991 definitely was a year. What ends up happening is that, first of all, picking up on the momentum from all the former satellite states, you have some of the republics of the Soviet Union. Okay, remember USSR, Union of Socialist, Soviet Socialist Republics. And so you have all these different republics, okay, Chechnya, Ukraine, Belarus, they've all are part of the Soviet Union, and some of them wanted to be, and some of them not so much. And what they pretty much take their cue from the satellite states. Like, you know what? We want to be independent as well. We no longer want to be politically bound to the Soviet Union. And so a number of them begin movements to basically to overthrow the leaders in those republics who are communist, Soviet connected, and replace them with the governments they want. Right? So you start to see the Soviet Union immediately begin to shrink. Okay, is what happens first, as some of these republics are jumping ship. Geographically, they're still neighbors alongside the Soviet Union, but they are cutting the political ties, all right? And then by 1991, that finally catches up to the Soviet Union itself. And really, it just comes down to, a combination of, some historians say that ultimately what brought down the end of the Soviet Union was pretty much kind of like bankruptcy, that they just go broke, that no matter what tinkering they're doing, perestroika, unloading all these, satellite states and even the republics, it can't financially save them. And then there's another aspect of it that, other historians that just pretty much say that the constant pressure applied by Ronald Reagan to challenge them to keep up with us with the arms race that Reagan restarted, put even more pressure and made it even easier for the Soviet Union to fall. What ends up happening is at the highest levels, Gorbachev, they begin to discuss ending the Soviet Union. There are members of the Soviet military that rise up to try to attempt basically a coup to try to force communism, to keep communism in the Soviet Union, and that ends up failing. You end up with Russian troops on the streets, Russian people, basically huge mobs, telling the soldiers, "You're one of us, join us." It's over, and it does. It ends. The hammer and sickle flag is brought down one last time, and the Federation of Russia flag goes back up, and we're back to having a Russia. And so the Soviet Union, it's in a way, after all of the the years and the kind of the power that this country had for so long, and the fear that it created, it's kind of an underwhelming end. It's a little bit of a fairly quiet end that when we see it come to a close. All right, but that is that. And with the fall of the Soviet Union, that is the end of the Cold War. I mean, if the two foes were the United States and the Soviet Union, as of 1991, the United States is still standing. The Soviet Union is history. And so there you go. There's your winner. There's your loser. All right. Although I should note, before we move on to decolonization, a lot of historians question, are we back into a new Cold War, in 2025? Looking at some of the recent tensions with Vladimir Putin and his control over Russia, and war in Ukraine, things like that. There are those who question whether we have, deliberately or inadvertently, have drifted into a new Cold War. And then others who watch this kind of stuff that said even beyond that. I mean, Cold War against China. That the conflicts and the differences that we have with them. But as far as we historically need to know for Unit 8, boom, that's the end of the Cold War. Okay, all right. I think I'm going to get us just a little bit of a start going here on decolonization, and we'll leave the rest of it for in class. Okay, basically, there we go. What is it and why is it? Well, what is it is just the way it sounds. Decolonization. All right, this is just the idea of the imperial powers giving up their colonies. All right, colonies finally gaining their independence. And we're going to see this movement really kick off with the end of World War II. And why we're at the end of World War II? We didn't see a lot happen after the end of World War I. We had the French that allowed their, some of their colonists, not all of them, some of their colonists a little bit more, some working rights, connected there. But big scheme of things, no, not a whole lot. So what is it different? What's different about the end of World War II? We can look at it in different ways. First of all, the concept of superpowers. Now, definitely 100%. The old powers are second rate. Okay, the French, the British, the Dutch, all these countries that have had so much sway over politics and economics and and imperialism. These countries coming out of World War II they're a shadow of what they were before the war. And definitely a shadow of what they were back, right prior to World War I, when they were the ones, strutting around on the world stage. They are economically impoverished from the war, and they are beginning to question whether the cost of administering these colonies, okay, having to have soldiers in those colonies, having to have government officials in those colonies, that kind of thing, are the costs worth it? For the natural resources that they are still trying to extract from those colonies. Okay, and then as we see time kind of move on post World War II, we're also going to start to see the rapid expansion of Asian markets that are going to be competition to the natural resources coming out of the old colonies of those European powers, and that will put even more economic pressure on them because now they're having to compete against new markets in the Far East and making their colonies even less profitable for them. So there's a whole lot going in there when we talk about why. Why do the Europeans now start into this process of granting independence to these colonies? In some cases, almost 100 years later, they've been there, for a long, long time. Okay, and so. I guess, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So there's that mention about World War II, the importance that it plays. Okay. Remember that throughout all of this, the colonized, native indigenous people of these colonies have never stopped pushing back against the British, the French, the Dutch, whoever's running the colonies. And so, the idea of this resistance of these freedom movements has never been extinguished. And when World War II ends, they start up, again, we talked about, those colonies, many of them, yeah, they contributed to the war effort. Now the war is over, boom, they're back to demanding their freedom. Okay. And then, as I mentioned before, just the profitability model. The reason they have those colonies is because they make, just, sacks of money off of them. If that starts to go away, then what's the point? Why have them? This whole imperialism, as we talked about, is driven by money, driven by profit and the power that it brings. And so if the money's not there, if the profit's not there, the power's not there, why even go through the hassle? All right. Okay, we'll talk about some of the early examples of decolonization. One of the first to go will be India. All right, and probably a country that had fought, at least on a world stage, probably harder than a lot of others. It done a good job of publicizing their protest against British rule. And especially Gandhi, who really, I think people always kind of equate him with just this humble, little man, who, kind of with this idea of nonviolent protest and, was kind of almost Jesus-like. But he was also very smart and very savvy. And he was a guy that knew how to manipulate the media, how to use, the newspapers and old newsreels, basically old news video, the equivalent to that, to help his cause. And by 1947, the British are ready to lower the flag and hand power over. When that handoff takes place, it is an ugly one. It is ugly because at the same time that the British bring down the flag and leave India for the last time, the decision is made that India is going to be divided. And this is to deal with the problem of this, Muslim minority that goes all the way back to the Mughals, and then the majority of Sikhs and Hindus. And the decision is made to create a new country of Pakistan. That is where the Muslims will be able to call their homeland. And then Sikhs and Hindus, who generally coexist just fine, they will possess the rest of what will just be known as India. Okay. It calls for a massive displacement of people. Muslims who live in India have to basically pack up their lives, their families. They have to leave their jobs, and some of them had been living in the towns and villages they'd been in for generations, and so it's just, it's gut wrenching for many of them to have to pack up and go to Pakistan. And then the opposite for Hindus and Sikhs that live in that part of the country to have to do the same and get themselves to India. And in the transition, as they're making this move, all right, Muslims moving west, Sikhs and Hindus moving east, violence breaks out. And it gets incredibly bloody as you have Muslims attacking Sikhs and Hindus and Sikhs attacking Muslims. And and they talk about, in the area of about 1 million people dying in the course of all this violence that breaks out. So by no stretch is it going to be clean. And we'll see plenty of examples like this, that decolonization is not always going to be what we would think, which would be a cause for celebration. It's oftentimes going to come with a lot of challenge involved. Okay. Ghana will be another African colony, or the first of the African colonies that Britain possesses that they will grant freedom to. You'll see a little further on down the road here, it takes the British to finally decide to grant independence to Ghana. But they will do so, and the guy you see pictured over here on the left, Kwame Nkrumah, will become the first Ghanese leader after the British leave to run the country. He will be brought down in a military coup in 1966, and that coup will be sponsored by outsiders, including some European powers who aren't quite 100% finished with wanting their hands in the affairs of these countries. And again, another little example of where it's potentially going to get kind of ugly here. We're not going to get a lot of really, really strong, basically, happy endings to all of this. Okay. But I guess I'll put an ending to where we're at right now, because I'm coming up on 30 minutes. And this puts us in a pretty good place. We basically have 2 slides to finish off Unit 8 and then our lightning run over Unit 9. Okay, but that'll cover it for now. And yep, we'll get the rest of it in class. Take care.